Ugly Volvo. There's two words you're never going to hear in 2018, and the all-new Volvo S60 is no exception. If you're bored by the A4, the C-Class and the 3 Series, this could be your new set of wheels. So you can see from the outside here that the S60 is perfectly proportioned. It's just under 4.8 metres long, which means it sits confidently on the road, and it looks bigger than its competitors in the segment, despite the fact it's around the same sort of size. I love the palette of colours as well. You can go through every single shade here with these Volvos, and it also comes with a number of options for sportiness. So this one here has the R-Design package, also has the Sport chassis, which lowers it by 12mm and gives it that hunkered down look on the road. In terms of cargo capacity, we're talking about 442 litres, and it is a decent opening there, which means it's easy to get things in and out, but it is down on some of its competitors, which is interesting. Inside is my favourite part, so let's have a squeeze. This is what I'm talking about. How good does this interior look? Volvo is nailing exteriors at the moment, but they are hitting it for 6 inside the cabin too. This looks sensational. So you've got excellent build, fit and finish in here. So every surface you touch feels really well built. And that's important because this car is actually built here in the States, in South Carolina. So when it does eventually come to Australia, we will be getting it from the US. So you're not exactly getting a typical Swedish car. So it's good news that they can take manufacturing offshore and it still works. You have this awesome infotainment system in the center. It's fairly easy to use. You flick between the screens and then it's like an iPad. You've got a home button at the bottom. It's not quite as good as an iDrive system, but it does quite well there. You also have voice recognition, which means you can speak to it and it will process all those commands. You've got Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, so all your tech is sorted. If you love sound, you are going to love the Bowers & Wilkins sound system. It is absolutely next level. It sounds incredible. So that's always good. Storage, there's plenty of storage throughout the cabin there, through the center console. You've got USB charging, and there's plenty of room in this car as well. Normally with an A4 3 Series size car, you're pretty cramped in the back seat there, but I can fit behind my typical driving position, which is quite far back, without any dramas at all. What about the engines though? Well, let's head out for a drive and we'll talk about which powertrains you can option with the all-new S60. Given the S60 is going to be sold all over the world and predominantly as well in the US, they've gone pretty hard with the engines. So in Europe, they're going to get a T5, which is an entry-level 4-cylinder turbocharged petrol engine. But here in the US and in Australia is where we're going to be talking about some real cracking engines. So this car here that we're driving is called the T6 R-Design, and that comes with a 2-litre turbocharged 4-cylinder petrol engine. But the coolest part is it uses both a turbocharger and a supercharger. So that means you have instant throttle response regardless of where you are. Makes 228 kilowatts of power and 400 newton meters of torque. So it is a really good package if you do want an enthusiastic drive. Plug-in hybrids are all the rage at Volvo here as well, with T6 and T8 also available with twin engine. And that's Volvo speak for a petrol engine that powers the front axle, and then electric motor that powers the rear axle. So beneath the floor of the T6 and the T8 twin engine, you get a 10 kilowatt hour battery that allows the car to run on full EV mode if required, or a full all-wheel drive mode. It doesn't have a mechanical system, so you've got to remember that you've got electric running the back and petrol running the front. But they are some really impressive powertrain options because 251 kilowatts of power, 590 newton meters of torque from the T6 twin engine, and that bumps up to 298 kilowatts of power and a mammoth 640 newton meters of torque from the T8 twin engine. But if you do want that performance bent, Volvo's blown it out of the water with the Polestar engineered version of the T8. That cranks it up to 309 kilowatts of power, 670 newton meters of torque, and that comes standard with the Sport chassis, which means you get 12mm lower ride height. And instead of using adaptive dampers, which are available across the rest of this S60 range, it actually comes with a custom setup that you can adjust yourself. So you can adjust the rebound rate, which means you can get that body to sit nice and flat if you want to give it a pummel through some corners. The ride here in the slower stuff is good, but as we've found in our T6 car, without adaptive suspension and a Sport chassis optioned, yes, it does sit lower and you do get a sporty feel behind the wheel. It can be a little bit firm, and a lot of these roads that we're driving on here in California are fairly smooth, so you're finding that you are picking up a lot of bumps as you're driving along. So when it does come to Australia, we'll be keen to see how this fares, and it's almost likely going to be a recommendation to head towards the adaptive suspension option. Steering feel is excellent. In the comfort mode, it's super light, and then you can switch drive modes using this little toggle down here to Eco, Comfort, or Dynamic. Dial-up Dynamic, the steering wheel becomes a little bit heavier. It goes into a sport mode with sharper throttle response, and overall it feels a little sportier. And the thing I really like about this car is the engine note. So you hit that throttle, you can hear it moving in the background there with that exhaust note. There's a little bit of noise plumbed into the cabin, but it's the supercharger whine that's really cool. Never expect that from a 4-cylinder engine. Straight line acceleration is really brisk in all of these models. The T6 just delivers that punch in the back you need, and there's a surety there from the all-wheel drive system. It doesn't tend to understeer or oversteer. It's just a really well-balanced setup. But when you do step up to that T8, it'll do 0 to 100 in 4.9 seconds. And then if you option the Polestar edition version, it drops down to 4.7 seconds. So those numbers are critical because it is fast. And it's fast especially for Volvo, because if you remember the last Polestar edition, it was quite expensive and quite thirsty, and obviously relied on just a petrol engine as opposed to this hybrid setup, which gives you the extra kick in the pants. The only issue with the T8 is the brakes. They are so incredibly sensitive, and the reason behind that is they had to find the need to blend between the regen system, which can be quite strong, recharges the battery and also slows the car down, but also the Brembo brakes, 6-piston calipers up front. It's quite a meaty setup, so you have to strike a balance between that regen mode and then the normal braking mode, and when you blend in between them, that's when you run into problems and you can't get consistency, and that's why you almost go through the windscreen every time you hit the brakes. That's been your first look at the all-new Volvo S60. While the suspension is a little bit firm here in the T6, overall Volvo has done a really good job. The interior is beautiful, there's plenty of room inside, and it feels quite big for a car in this segment. We're excited to test it against some of its bigger picture rivals in Australia when it lands in 2019, and that includes some performance cars, because that T8 model will be absolutely cracking, especially with the Polestar engineering package. So in the interim, head to caradvice.com where you can find out all of the details you need about the all-new Volvo S60.